I sat in the mahogany-lined boardroom, my expression carefully neutral as Richard Bennett, my father's successor as CEO, delivered his practiced speech. The other board members watched with barely concealed smirks as he paced dramatically around the table. "Sarah," he paused for effect, straightening his expensive tie, "your performance review has been disappointing. The board agrees it's time for changes. Changes that don't include nepotism." I glanced at my laptop screen, pretending to check the time. In reality, I was recording everything. 3 months ago, when my father passed away unexpectedly, I'd known this moment would come. Richard had been gunning for my position since day one, convinced I was just another privileged daughter riding on Daddy's coattails. With all due respect, I kept my voice steady. "I've increased my department's efficiency by 40% this quarter alone. Our client retention rate is the highest it's been in 5 years." Richard's smirk widened. "Numbers can be manipulated, Sarah. We all know how you got this position." He exchanged knowing looks with the other board members. "Your father isn't here to protect you anymore." That stung. Dad had been gone exactly 3 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. The wound was still fresh, but I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. Furthermore, Richard continued, clearly enjoying himself, "we've uncovered some concerning expenses." He slid a folder across the table. "Business dinners at high-end restaurants, first-class flights to client meetings." I didn't bother opening the folder. Those expenses had all been approved, documented, and had resulted in millions in new contracts. But Richard wasn't interested in facts. "The board has voted unanimously. You're terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you to clear out your office." The room erupted in poorly concealed chuckles. These men had waited years for this moment, convinced they were finally putting the boss's spoiled daughter in her place. If only they knew. I stood slowly, smoothing my skirt. "Very well. I accept your decision." My calm response seemed to disappoint them. They'd expected tears, begging, maybe even a tantrum. "That's it." Richard looked almost disappointed. "No protests about calling Daddy's lawyers?" I smiled, gathering my belongings. "No need. I'm sure this will all sort itself out." As I walked toward the door, Richard couldn't resist one final jab. "By the way, we're also voting to sell your father's pet project, the Thompson Street development. Too much dead weight." I paused at the door. The Thompson Street project had been Dad's dream. Affordable housing for lower-income families with integrated community services. He'd fought for years to get it approved. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," I said quietly. Richard laughed loudly. "And why's that? Going to haunt us from the unemployment line?" I left without responding. Let them laugh. They had no idea what was coming. What Richard and the board didn't know, what my father and I had carefully hidden for years, was that I owned 70% of the company's shares. Not through inheritance, not through Daddy's gifts, but through my own carefully planned acquisitions over the past decade. While they saw me as the CEO's privileged daughter, I've been quietly building my own empire. Every bonus, every commission, every penny I'd earned had gone into buying shares through various shell companies. Dad had taught me well, keep your cards close, let them underestimate you, and strike when they least expect it. I walked to my office, ignoring the curious stares from employees who'd undoubtedly heard the news already. Office gossip traveled fast. My assistant Jenny looked up with tears in her eyes. "Miss Carter, I heard. I'm so sorry." I smiled reassuringly. "Pack up anything personal, Jenny, but don't worry about looking for a new job just yet." She looked confused but nodded. Jenny had been my father's assistant before mine, one of the few people who knew the real story. I took nothing from my office except a single photo. Dad and me at my college graduation, both of us beaming. He'd been so proud mine graduated top of my class in business and finance, even prouder when I'd insisted on starting in entry-level positions despite his role as CEO. "Learn the business from the ground up," he'd advised. "Let them underestimate you. It's the best advantage you can have." My phone buzzed with texts from Richard's inner circle, unable to resist gloating. Guess Daddy's princess finally got what she deserved. Back to shopping with Daddy's credit cards. Should have stuck to planning charity galas. I screenshot each message, adding them to my evidence folder. Their arrogance would be their downfall. At home, I opened my laptop and began implementing the plan I prepared months ago. First, a call to my lawyers, the real ones. not the company's legal team that Richard thought was my only resource. It's time, I told Marcus, my lead counsel. Initialize Project Phoenix. Already? He sounded surprised. We thought they'd at least wait until the quarterly reports. They got cocky. Start with the shares audit. I want everything ready for next month's shareholders meeting. Next, I contacted the heads of our major client accounts, the ones I personally secured over the years. Many were women who faced similar discrimination in their rises to power. They'd been quietly informed of the possibility of changes months ago. Sarah, Victoria Chen, CEO of our largest tech client, answered immediately. I heard. Moving forward as discussed. Yes. How soon can you begin transitioning your contracts? Give me the word and we'll start tomorrow. My board's already approved the contingency plans. By midnight, everything was in motion. I allowed myself a small glass of Dad's favorite whiskey, picking up the photo from my graduation. You were right, Dad, I whispered. They never saw me coming. The next few weeks passed in a blur of carefully orchestrated moves. Richard and the board, confident in their victory, began implementing changes, cutting corners on quality control, laying off experienced staff, preparing to gut Dad's beloved Thompson Street project. I watched it all from afar, documenting every violation of company policy, every ethical breach. Richard's arrogance made him sloppy. He didn't even notice when key clients began quietly pulling their contracts, or when small batches of shares started changing hands through seemingly unrelated transactions. A month after my termination, I received an early morning call from Jenny. Miss Carter, Mr. Bennett is trying to push through the sale of the Thompson Street project today. He's called an emergency board meeting. Perfect timing, I smiled. Tell Lawrence to proceed with the shareholders meeting announcement. Within hours, Richard's phone would be blowing up with notifications. A major shareholders meeting had been called, one he hadn't authorized. The announcement would reveal that an audit had uncovered significant concentrated share ownership through various investment companies that all traced back to me. I dressed carefully that morning, not in the designer suits Richard and the board were used to seeing me in, but in a sharp, powerful black dress that meant business. Dad's vintage watch, a gift on my first day at the company, completed the outfit. As I drove to the office, my phone exploded with messages from board members, each more panicked than the last. Sarah, we should talk. There must be some mistake in the ownership audit. Perhaps we were hasty. I ignored them all. They'd had their fun. Now it was my turn. The lobby fell silent as I walked in, head held high. Everyone had received the shareholders meeting announcement. Everyone knew something big was about to happen. Richard was waiting by the elevator, his face ashen. Sarah, we need to talk. This audit, there must be some mistake. No mistake, Richard. I stepped past him into the elevator. Though I'm surprised it took you this long to figure it out. Dad always said you were slow with numbers. The boardroom was packed. Every board member, major shareholder, and executive had rushed in for the emergency meeting. Their faces showed varying degrees of panic as they pieced together what was happening. I took my father's old seat at the head of the table. No one protested. Let me make this simple. I began, my voice carrying easily through the silent room. I own 70% of this company, not through inheritance, not through Daddy's gifts. Through my own acquisitions over the past 10 years. Richard started to speak. I held up a hand, silencing him. The board's recent actions have violated numerous company policies and ethical guidelines. I have documentation of everything. The discriminatory firing, the client contract breaches, the quality control cuts, the attempts to sabotage the Thompson Street project. I opened my laptop, displaying a series of damning emails and financial records on the room's main screen. Effective immediately, the entire board is suspended pending a full investigation. Security is currently escorting your replacements into the building. Executives chosen for their experience and integrity, not their ability to play politics. The room erupted in protests. I let them rage for a moment before continuing. Richard, you once asked why I wasn't calling Daddy's lawyers. I didn't need to. I have my own. On cue, Marcus and his team entered the room, carrying thick folders of legal documents. You have two choices, I continued. Resign quietly with basic severance, or face legal action for your numerous policy violations. Your choice. Richard's face had turned an interesting shade of purple. You can't do this. You're just. Just what, Richard? The CEO's daughter. You're right, I am. He taught me everything I know about business, including the most important lesson. Let your enemies underestimate you. One by one, the board members slunk out, their dreams of corporate takeover crumbling around them. Richard was the last to leave, his earlier arrogance replaced by shocked defeat. I spent the rest of the day in meetings with the new board members, outlining my vision for the company's future. The Thompson Street project would proceed as planned, expanded even. New ethical guidelines would be implemented. The employees Richard had fired would be rehired with back pay. Late that evening, I visited Dad's grave, placing fresh flowers by his headstone. We did it, Dad, I whispered. They never saw me coming. Just like you said. My phone buzzed with a text from Jenny. Ms. Carter, the press release is ready for your approval. And Victoria Chin called. She wants to double her company's contracts with us. I smiled, touching Dad's headstone one last time before heading home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but I was ready for them. After all, I was my father's daughter and so much more. 6 months after the boardroom takeover, I sat in my father's old office, my office now, reviewing the company's latest quarterly reports. The numbers told a story of transformation, profits up 35%, employee satisfaction at an all-time high, and the Thompson Street project ahead of schedule. But Richard and his cronies weren't going quietly into the night. Ms. Carter, Jenny's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Chen from the Times is here for your interview. Send him in. I closed my laptop, straightening the family photo on my desk. A new one now, showing Dad and me at my first board meeting. The article Richard had planted in the business section last week had been vicious. Daddy's girl destroys family legacy. It was time to set the record straight. Miss Carter, the reporter began, settling into the chair across from me. Your former board members claim you orchestrated a hostile takeover. I smiled, sliding across a folder of documents. Let's talk about what really happened. The interview lasted 2 hours. I showed him everything. The documentation of my share acquisitions, the performance reports Richard had buried, the text messages and emails revealing their discrimination. By the end, he was shaking his head in disbelief. They never knew. All those years. They saw what they wanted to see, I replied. A privileged daughter playing at business. It never occurred to them to look deeper. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Richard's wife, his ex-wife now. She'd reached out last week, wanting to meet. That evening, I found Catherine Bennett waiting at my usual coffee shop, looking nothing like the polished society wife I remembered. Divorce had changed her. Thank you for meeting me, she began, hands wrapped tightly around her cup. There's something you need to know. Richard, he's planning something. He and the others, they've been meeting secretly. I'd known of the meetings, my security team had documented everyone. But Catherine's next words caught me off guard. They're going after the Thompson Street project. Richard found out about the contamination reports. My blood ran cold. The contamination reports had been Dad's biggest worry. Traces of industrial waste from the 1970s, all carefully documented and being properly handled during construction. But in the wrong hands. He's planning to leak doctored versions to the media, Catherine continued. Make it look like your father knew and covered it up. Like you're continuing the cover-up. I reached for my phone, sending a quick text to Marcus. Initiate Protocol Delta. We prepared for something like this, but Richard's timing was clever. The project's first phase was nearly complete, with families already selected for the initial housing units. Why are you telling me this? I asked Catherine. She smiled bitterly. 23 years of marriage and Richard never once saw me as more than an accessory. Sound familiar? The next morning, Richard made his move. Every major news outlet received an anonymous tip about environmental hazards at the Thompson Street development. Social media exploded with accusations and conspiracy theories. But we were ready. I called an emergency press conference at the construction site. As reporters gathered, I noticed Richard in the crowd, barely concealing his triumphant smirk. Ladies and gentlemen, I began yesterday. Some attempted to create panic about this project by leaking falsified environmental reports. Today, I'm going to show you the truth. I gestured, and a team of environmental engineers stepped forward. For the next hour, they presented the real data, every test, every remediation measure, every safety protocol. Then came the families who would be moving in, speaking about what this project meant to them. Finally, I delivered the knockout blow. And now, I'd like to announce an expansion of the project. Thanks to a generous donation from Catherine Bennett, I saw Richard's smirk disappear. We're adding a community center that will provide free childcare and job training for residents. The reporters loved it. The story shifted overnight from alleged scandal to redemption tale. Pictures of Richard's shocked face became a meme. But he had one last card to play. A week later, Jenny rushed into my office, face pale. Turn on the news. There was Richard, standing outside the company headquarters with several former board members. They were announcing a class action lawsuit, claiming I had manipulated share prices and coerced board members into selling. I watched calmly as he made his accusations, noting how his designer suit couldn't quite hide how much weight he'd lost, how his practiced corporate smile had acquired a desperate edge. Jenny, I called Get Me Victoria Chen on the phone. Victoria answered on the first ring. I saw the news. What do you need? Remember those offshore accounts Richard used for his little side deals? Time to bring them to light. Within hours, financial reporters were breaking a very different story. Richard and several board members had been running a complex scheme of kickbacks and insider trading for years. The evidence was overwhelming and anonymously provided. I watched from my office window as FBI agents led Richard out in handcuffs. He looked up, finally seeing me. I raised my coffee cup in a mock toast. That evening, as the story dominated the news cycles, I visited Dad's grave again. The headstone now bore fresh engravings. Beloved father and mentor, his legacy lives on. You should see the company now, Dad, I said softly. The Thompson Street project is just the beginning. We're expanding into 3 more neighborhoods. Remember how you always said business should serve the community, not just shareholders? My phone buzzed. Jenny sending the latest stock prices. They'd hit an all-time high. 1 year after my firing, I stood on the podium at the Thompson Street project's grand opening. Hundreds of people gathered to watch as the first families received their keys. The community center, now named after my father, was already offering classes. Richard's attempted revenge had backfired spectacularly. Not only was he facing federal charges, but his actions had brought positive attention to the project. Applications for housing had tripled. Other companies were launching similar initiatives, seeking our guidance. Catherine sat in the front row, beaming. She found her calling managing the community center's programs. Next to her sat Jenny, recently promoted to chief of staff. As I cut the ribbon, my father's words echoed in my mind. Success isn't just about making money, Sarah. It's about making a difference. The company had transformed. The old board's focus on quick profits had been replaced by sustainable growth and community investment. Employee turnover dropped to record lows. Our client base expanded globally. But the real victory wasn't in the numbers. It was in the faces of the families moving into their new homes, in the single mother who just completed the job training program and landed a management position, in the children playing in the community center's daycare while their parents attended classes. 2 years after that fateful board meeting, I received an unexpected visitor. Richard's daughter, fresh out of business school, stood nervously in my office. I know this is awkward, she began, but I've been following what you've done here. The way you transformed the company, how you handled everything. I was wondering if there might be an entry-level position available? I studied her carefully, seeing something familiar in her determined expression. Your father hasn't spoken to me since I testified at his trial, she finished. He never thought I had a head for business either. I smiled, remembering another young woman determined to prove herself. When can you start? That evening, reviewing the day's reports in my office, I paused at the photo of Dad and me at my graduation. Next to it stood a newer photo, me with the first group of Thompson Street residents, all of us grinning at the camera. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria Chen, ready to discuss that international expansion. I smiled, thinking of all the lessons learned, battles fought, and victories won. Richard and the old board had thought they were ending my career that day. Instead, they'd helped launch a new era, not just for the company, but for everyone it touched. They thought I was just the CEO's daughter. They'd never understood that being his daughter meant learning from the best. About business, about integrity, and about turning enemies' arrogance into opportunity. As I gathered my things to leave for the day, Jenny appeared in the doorway. Ms. Carter, the new board is waiting for the strategy meeting. I glanced at Dad's photo one last time. Coming, Jenny. We've got work to do. The company's transformation was far from complete. There would be new challenges, new opponents, new opportunities, but I was ready for them all. After all, I wasn't just the CEO's daughter anymore. I was the CEO who learned from every attempt to diminish her, who turned underestimation into advantage, and who'd proven that the greatest revenge isn't just success. It's success that lifts others up along the way. Richard's cruel laughter in that boardroom seemed like a lifetime ago. He thought he was writing my ending. Instead, he'd only set the stage for my beginning. And what a beginning it had been.